I was 19 when I learned that love and family are just words people use to get you to sign things. My name is Maya. I'm 34 years old. I teach American history at a high school in a town so small that the grocery store still closes on Sundays, and everyone knows which house is yours by the color of your mailbox. I live in a little cottage with a porch that creaks when it rains, and I have a cat named Hemingway who is objectively too fat for his own good. I make lesson plans about the Revolutionary War. I grade papers with coffee that goes cold before I finish it. I am, by every visible measure, a very boring person. And 15 years ago, I gave away the only thing that ever made me feel like I wasn't. Welcome to Little Bunny Stories. If you're new here, my name is Maya, and this is the channel where we talk about the things families do to each other when they think no one is watching. If you've ever had someone look you in the eye and tell you they loved you while they were slowly taking everything that mattered, hit that subscribe button. You're not alone. And if you've already subscribed, thank you. You make it possible for stories like mine to find the people who need them. Here's my story. I grew up in a house that looked perfect from the street. 2 stories. White picket fence. My mother's hydrangeas blooming like they were trying to win a contest. My father was a dentist. My mother was a dental hygienist who stopped working when she had children, which was the kind of decision people in our town called sacrifice and never questioned. We had family dinners at 6. We said grace. We went to church on Easter and Christmas, which my mother called the minimum viable spirituality. I was the second daughter. Claire was 5 years older, and she was the sun that everything in our family orbited. She was beautiful in a way that made adults pause mid-sentence. Blonde hair that fell in perfect waves without her touching it. Green eyes that my grandmother said were the color of money, which is fitting because that girl is going to have plenty of it. She was valedictorian. She was captain of the debate team. She got into Cornell on a full ride, and when she walked across the stage at graduation, my father cried so hard he had to leave the auditorium. Fine, I got B's. I had 2 friends. I played clarinet in the marching band, which is the instrument you play when you don't care enough to fight for something better. I was nice. People said I was sweet, which is what they call you when they can't think of anything else. I was invisible in a house where Claire took up all the light and I didn't mind. I had books. I had a diary with a lock that Claire picked open when she was bored, read aloud at dinner, and then put back like nothing happened. I had the vague, unformed hope that someday I would matter to someone the way Claire mattered to everyone. I met David at a party the summer after my freshman year of college. He was 22, working at his uncle's construction company, with hands that were always rough and a laugh that made me feel like I was in on a joke that everyone else missed. We dated for 3 months. I thought I loved him. I know now that what I loved was the way he looked at me, like I was the only person in the room, like I was interesting, like I was worth choosing. When I missed my period, I didn't tell anyone for 6 weeks. I bought a test at a pharmacy 3 towns over, took it in a gas station bathroom, and sat on the toilet for 20 minutes staring at 2 pink lines like they were a math problem I couldn't solve. I was 19. I was a history major with no money and no plan. My parents had paid for Claire's entire education without blinking, but they had made it clear that my exploratory major was a luxury they were indulging, not an investment they believed in. I told David first. He said all the right things, we'll figure it out, I'm not going anywhere, I love you, and then he moved to Florida with his uncle's company 2 weeks later. I found out from a text that said, I'm sorry, I can't do this. Please don't contact me again. I still have that screenshot. Not because I miss him, because I need to remember that I love you is just a collection of sounds people make when they want something from you. I told my mother next. She didn't yell. She sat at the kitchen table and folded a dish towel for 10 minutes without speaking, and then she said, your father cannot know about this until we have a plan. The plan, it turned out, was Claire. Claire was in her 2nd year of law school. She had married Richard, a 30-year-old venture capitalist she'd met at a networking event the previous spring in a wedding that cost more than my parents' house. They lived in a penthouse in the city. They had a housekeeper. They had a life that looked, from the outside, like the answer to every question I'd ever been afraid to ask. When my mother called her, Claire drove home that same night. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd done homework, where I'd eaten cereal on Saturday mornings, where my mother had told me my father was disappointed in my SAT scores, and she looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, not judgment, something closer to assessment, like I was a case study, like I was a problem she was already solving in her head. "You're not keeping it," she said, not a question. "I don't know," I said. My voice sounded small. I hated how small I sounded. I thought maybe I could transfer to a school closer to home. Mom could help, I could get a job, Maya. She reached across the table and took my hand. Her hands were manicured, soft, nothing like mine. "You're 19, you don't have a job, you don't have savings, you don't have a partner. What you have is a future that looks exactly like Mom's, trapped in a small town, dependent on a man who resents you, wondering every day what your life could have been if you'd just been smarter for one single moment." I pulled my hand back. "That's not fair." "Life isn't fair," she said, and her voice was gentle. That was the worst part. She sounded like she was comforting me. "I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to save you from yourself. You think you can do this. You think you can be a mother. You can't even remember to feed your goldfish. You got a C in biology. You cry during commercials. You are not equipped for this, and pretending you are will destroy 3 lives, yours, the baby's, and Mom's, because you know she'll end up raising it while you're at some community college trying to figure out your life." I was crying by then. I always cried when I was cornered. It was my worst habit, the way my body betrayed me when I needed it to be strong. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. Claire leaned forward. Her eyes were so green, so certain. "Richard and I have been talking about starting a family, but my career, law school, then clerkships, then partnership track. I don't have time for pregnancy right now, but I have time for baby. I have resources, I have stability. I can give this child everything you can't. Private school, travel, a college fund that actually exists. And you," she paused, choosing her words like she was already writing the brief. "You can finish school. You can have the life you were supposed to have. You can be the cool aunt who visits on holidays. You can watch him grow up in a home where he's wanted, not resented. Where he's planned for, not survived." "Him," I whispered. "I have a feeling," she said, smiling. "Call it sister's intuition. I should have known. I should have heard the way she said him, already possessive, already decided. I should have seen the way she looked at my stomach like it was real estate she was appraising. But I was 19, and I was scared, and I had spent my entire life believing that Claire was smarter than me, better than me, that her certainty was a kind of truth I could never access." My mother didn't say much during that conversation. She sat at the edge of the table, twisting her wedding ring, and when Claire finished, she said, "Your sister loves you, Maya. She's trying to help. She's trying to take my baby," I said. The first time I'd said it out loud. My baby. It felt foreign and terrifying and true. "She's trying to give your baby a life," my mother corrected, and her voice was tired. "A life you can't provide right now. You're not ready. Deep down, you know you're not ready." I looked at them both, my mother, who had never chosen me over Claire in any argument we'd ever had, and Claire, who was already pulling out her phone to text Richard, already moving on to the logistics. I felt something crack inside me, not a decision, a surrender. The kind of giving up that happens when you realize no one in the room is actually on your side. "I want to see him," I said. "I want to be in his life. I want him to know I'm his mother." "Of course," Claire said, too quickly. "We'll tell him the truth when he's old enough. You'll be Aunt Maya. You'll visit. You'll be part of his life." "I promise, Maya. I swear on everything we are as sisters. This isn't me taking something from you. This is me holding it for you until you're ready to hold it yourself." She made it sound like love. It took me years to understand that she had simply learned, earlier than most, that the best way to take something from someone is to make them believe they're giving it freely. The adoption was finalized 3 weeks after I gave birth. I didn't have a lawyer. Claire did, a colleague of her professor's who generously handled the paperwork pro bono. I signed where I was told to sign. I cried through most of it, which the notary pretended not to notice. I held my son for exactly 4 to 7 minutes in the hospital room before Claire took him, wrapped him in a blanket I'd knitted during the last month of my pregnancy, and walked out with Richard waiting in the hallway. She didn't look back. I named him Caleb. Claire and Richard named him Ethan. I found out later, from a Christmas card my mother showed me, careful not to let me hold it too long. Ethan Richard Harrington. Born September 14. 7 pounds 3 ounces. Our miracle, I wasn't on the card. The first year Claire kept her promises, more or less. I visited twice. She let me hold him. She took photos where I was in the background, slightly out of focus, and posted them with captions about family gatherings. When I asked if I could tell him who I really was, she said he was too young. When I asked if I could visit more often, she said Richard's parents were traditional and might not understand. When I sent him a birthday present, a stuffed rabbit I'd saved from my own childhood, She returned it with a note. We don't do clutter in the house. Please check with me before sending gifts. The second year, she moved. Richard got a promotion and they relocated to a city 4 hours away. The visits stopped. The phone calls became texts, then became silence. When I showed up at their new address, I'd found it through my mother's address book, which she'd left open on the kitchen table, probably accidentally, probably not. Claire met me at the door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes and a folder in her hand. Maya, she said, before I could speak, I need you to understand something. Richard and I have decided that it's in Ethan's best interest to have a clean start. No confusion. No complications. He has a mother, me, he has a father. Richard, he has grandparents who adore him. What he doesn't need is a biological donor showing up at random intervals, introducing instability, making him question his place in the world. I'm his mother, I said, my voice shook. I hated that it shook. You promised. You swore on everything we are as sisters. And I meant it, she said, still smiling. At the time, but I've learned something in law school, Maya. Promises aren't enforceable unless they're in writing, and even then, she opened the folder. This is a cease and desist letter. It notes that you've been harassing my family, that your behavior has become concerning, that any further contact will result in legal action. I have it on good authority that a judge would grant a restraining order if necessary. Do you want that? Do you want your name on a public record as a stalker? Because I can make that happen. Easily, I looked past her into the house. I could see a playroom through the hallway, primary colors, a small table, a drawing taped to the wall that might have been a house, might have been a son. My son was in there somewhere, 2 years old, probably napping. Probably dreaming about things I would never know. Why are you doing this? I asked, not angry, just exhausted. The question you ask when you realize the person you trusted has been playing a game you didn't know existed, with rules they never explained. Because I can, she said. And then, softer, almost kind, because you let me. You signed him away, Maya. You gave him to me. And now I'm protecting him from you. That's what mothers do. She closed the door. I stood on the porch for 20 minutes, listening to the sounds of a family that should have been mine. And then I drove home and threw up in a gas station bathroom 3 towns over. The same bathroom where I'd taken the test. The same bathroom where I'd learned that my life was about to change. I sat on that toilet and I understood, finally, that change isn't always growth. Sometimes it's just loss, wearing a different costume. I told my parents everything. I expected. I don't know what I expected. Anger. Intervention. Someone to finally see Claire the way I was seeing her, as a person who collected people like trophies, who used love as leverage, who had looked at her pregnant teenage sister and seen an opportunity rather than a crisis. My father said, Claire has always been ambitious. That's not a crime. My mother said, you signed the papers, Maya. No one forced you. I said she manipulated me. She lied. She's cutting me out of my own son's life. And my mother, who had held my hand through fevers and broken hearts and the first day of school every year until I was 14, looked at me and said, I can't choose between my daughters. I won't. Claire is trying to protect that child. Maybe she's going about it wrong, but her intentions are good. She's always been the responsible one. The practical one. You have to admit, Maya, you weren't ready. You still aren't. She's erasing me, I said. She's telling him I don't exist. She's telling everyone I'm some kind of, then maybe, my father interrupted, his voice the same tone he used when he was filling a cavity, clinical and distant. You should focus on building a life of your own instead of obsessing over a child you gave up. Move on. Meet someone, have another family. This fixation isn't healthy. Claire is right to be concerned. I left their house that night and I didn't go back for 3 years. I transferred to a state college 200 miles away. I changed my major to education, because teaching felt like the closest I could get to parenting without actually being allowed to do it. I graduated. I got a job in a town where no one knew my name. I made friends who didn't ask about my family. I dated men who didn't know I had a nephew I'd never met, a sister I couldn't speak to, a hole in my life shaped like a child who was growing up without me. I tried to move on. I really did. I burned the photos I had, the few Claire had sent in that first year, the hospital Polaroid a nurse had snuck me, the ultrasound image I'd kept in my wallet until it cracked and faded. I told myself that Ethan Caleb was happy, that he had everything I couldn't give him, that Claire, for all her cruelty to me, might actually be a good mother to him, that love meant wanting his happiness even if I wasn't part of it. I told myself these things every day for 15 years. Some days I almost believed them. I found out about the divorce from a LinkedIn notification. Claire had updated her profile, family law attorney Harrington and Associates. Previously, partner Whitman Legal Group. The previously caught my eye. I clicked through, a habit I'd developed over the years, checking her social media the way you check a wound, knowing it will hurt, unable to stop yourself, and saw that Richard's name was gone from her experience section. Gone from her interests, gone from everything. I searched his name. Found a local news article from 6 months prior. Venture capitalist Richard Harrington files for bankruptcy amid fraud allegations. Found another, Harrington divorce finalized. No comment from either party. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table I'd bought at a garage sale when I moved into this cottage, the same table where I graded papers and ate cereal and tried to pretend my life was enough, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, not glee, a strange, hollow sadness. Claire had built her life on control, on acquisition, on the careful curation of appearances. And now the appearance had cracked. The control had slipped. She was 40 years old, divorced, professionally diminished, and for the first time since I was 19, I saw her as human. Fallible, as capable of loss as I had been. I didn't contact her. I told myself I was being mature, being healthy, being over it, but I kept checking. And 2 months later I found something that stopped my breath. It was on Ethan's social media. He was 15 now, old enough to have accounts, old enough to curate his own presence, old enough that Claire couldn't control every pixel of his digital life. His profile was private, but his profile picture was public. It was him at maybe 12, holding a fish, grinning at the camera. He had my chin, my mother's eyes. He looked like a stranger and like everything I'd ever wanted simultaneously. And his bio said, looking for answers about where I come from. If you knew my mom before she was mom, I want to hear from you. I read it 3 times. Then I closed my laptop and walked around my neighborhood for 2 hours, not feeling the cold, not noticing the dark, my heart beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. He was looking for me, or looking for something. Looking for the truth that Claire had buried so carefully that she had probably told herself was protection rather than erasure. I didn't message him. I was too scared. Too aware of how Claire would spin it. Your birth mother is unstable. She's been stalking us for years. She's dangerous. And how a 15-year-old boy, confused and searching, might believe her. I waited. I watched. I told myself I was being patient, but really I was being terrified. He found me first. It was a Tuesday. I was grading essays about the Louisiana Purchase. Was it constitutional? Defend your position with evidence, when my phone buzzed with a message request from an account I didn't recognize. The profile picture was the same fish photo. The name said E. Harrington. The message said, "Hi, I don't know if this is weird, probably it is. But I think you might be my aunt, my mom's sister. My name is Ethan. I'm 15. I found some letters in our attic. They were addressed to me, but they had your name on them. Like a lot of them. Like every birthday, every Christmas for years. My mom told me you were a distant cousin who had problems. But the letters, they don't sound like someone with problems. They sound like someone who really wanted to know me. If you're who I think you are, can we talk?" I read that message until the words stopped making sense as individual letters, until they became shapes, until they became the sound of my own breathing in an empty house. I didn't respond for 3 hours. I sat on my porch and watched the sun set, and tried to remember how to be a person who was allowed to want things. When I finally typed back, my hands were shaking so badly I made typos I had to correct 3 times. "Hi Ethan, I'm Maya, I'm not your aunt, I'm your mother, and I've been waiting 15 years to tell you that. We didn't meet right away. I was too careful for that, too aware of how Claire would react if she found out. We talked for 2 months, long messages, late-night texts, careful questions from both sides. He wanted to know everything. What I was like at 15, what music I liked, whether I was the reason Mom doesn't talk about her family. I tried to be honest without being cruel. I told him about my childhood, about Claire, about the adoption without using words like manipulated or stole. I let him draw his own conclusions. I let him ask the questions that hurt. "Why did you give me up?" he asked, 3 weeks in. It was a Saturday night. I was sitting on my porch with a blanket, even though it was too cold. Because I couldn't be inside while I answered this. Because I was 19, I said, because I was scared. Because Claire told me it was the best thing for you, and I believed her. Because I thought love meant wanting what was best for you, even if it cost me everything. I didn't know then that best is just a word people use to get you to stop fighting. "She told me you were a drug addict," he said. His voice, when we finally moved to phone calls, was deeper than I expected. Still changing, still boy and man at once. She said you tried to break into our house once, that you threatened her. I have never done drugs in my life, I said. I have never threatened anyone. I showed up at your door once when you were 2 because she had stopped letting me see you. She threatened me with a restraining order. I left. I didn't fight because I didn't have the money to fight, and I didn't have the power, and I didn't understand yet that the law isn't justice. It's just whoever can afford to use it better. There was a long silence. Then, she lies a lot. I mean, I knew that, about stupid stuff, about where she was, about money, but this is different. Yes, I said, it is. Why are you telling me this? He asked. You could have just not said anything. Let me think whatever. Why risk it? And I said because it was the truest thing I'd ever spoken, because for 15 years, I have been a ghost in my own life. Because you are the only person who ever made me feel like I wasn't boring, wasn't invisible, wasn't just sweet. Because you asked. Because you looked for me. And because, and this is the part that scares me most, I think you might be the only chance I ever get to be someone's mother. I'm not going to lie to protect the person who made sure I never could be. He didn't respond that night. I didn't sleep. I sat on the porch until Hemingway came out and sat on my lap, heavy and warm and indifferent to my crisis, and I tried to prepare myself for the possibility that I had just destroyed the only connection I would ever have with my son. That Claire would find out, would spin her story, would cut this thread before it could become anything real. The next morning his message said, "Can I visit? Next weekend?" I told Mom I'm staying with a friend. I want to meet you. I want to know the truth, all of it, even the parts that hurt. I cried for 20 minutes before I could type yes. He took a bus. 4 hours, which I offered to pay for, which he refused. I met him at the station, a Greyhound stop in a strip mall parking lot, which felt appropriate for the unglamorous reality of our reunion, and I knew him immediately. Not because he looked like me, though he did, more than he looked like Claire or Richard. I knew him because I had been imagining this moment for 15 years, and now it was here, and it was both more ordinary and more extraordinary than any fantasy. He was tall. 15, but already taller than me. He had my chin, my mother's eyes, and a nervous habit of bouncing his knee that I recognized from my own anxiety. He wore a hoodie with the logo of a band I'd never heard of, and he carried a backpack that looked too heavy, and when he saw me, he stopped walking and just stared. "Hi," I said. My voice sounded strange, too high, too hopeful. "Hi," he said, "then you look like her. My mom, Claire, I mean, but softer. She always looks like she's about to tell me I'm doing something wrong." I laughed, surprised. She looked at me that way my whole life. "Yeah," he said, "I bet." He shifted his backpack. "So, this is weird, right?" "Extremely," I agreed. "Good weird or bad weird?" I thought about it. I don't know yet. "But I'm glad you're here." We went to my cottage. I made tea I wasn't sure he drank. We sat on my creaky porch and I told him everything, the pregnancy, the pressure, the adoption, the promises, the silence. I showed him the documents I'd kept, the original birth certificate, the adoption decree, the cease and desist letter, the return birthday cards. I didn't cry. I had expected to cry, but instead I felt a strange calm, the kind that comes when you finally say the things you've been rehearsing in your head for a decade and a half. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "She told me my birth mother was dead. For a while when I was little. Then she said you were alive but not well. Then she said you were a cousin. She's been editing the story my whole life." "Yes," I said. "Why didn't you fight harder?" he asked. Not angry, curious. The question of a child who has never had to surrender something precious because someone convinced him he didn't deserve to keep it. "Because I didn't know how," I said. "Because I was 19 and poor, and she was a law student with a rich husband and a family that believed her. Because when everyone you trust tells you that you're the problem, you start to believe it. Because I thought if I just loved you enough from a distance, it would be enough. It wasn't. I know that now." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I'm going to keep visiting, if that's okay. I want to know you, the real you, not the story she told." "It's more than okay," I said, "it's everything." Claire found out after the 3rd visit. I don't know how. Maybe Ethan left something at my house. Maybe he was less careful with his phone than he thought. Maybe she was tracking him, which wouldn't have surprised me. She showed up at my cottage on a Sunday morning, no warning. Her car in my driveway before I even knew she knew where I lived. She looked different. Older, of course, we both were, but more than that, smaller. The confidence that had radiated from her like heat was dimmed, chipped away by divorce and bankruptcy and whatever else had happened in the years since I'd seen her last. Her hair was shorter, gray at the temples she hadn't bothered to dye. Her eyes were the same green, but they didn't assess me anymore. They looked at me like I was a problem she no longer had the energy to solve. "You need to stop seeing him," she said, without hello, without preamble. She stood on my porch, not sitting, not accepting the tea I didn't offer. "You're confusing him, you're destabilizing his life. He has a mother, me, he doesn't need a biological curiosity disrupting everything. He's 15, I said. He's not a child you can control anymore." And he found me. "I didn't seek him out. You answered," she snapped. "You told him things, lies about me, about the adoption. I told him the truth," I said. My voice was steady. I was surprised by how steady. I told him I loved him. I told him I never stopped wanting to know him. I told him that the person who raised him made choices that hurt me, and that I'm not asking him to choose sides, but I'm not going to lie about what happened to protect your narrative. "He's my son," she said, and her voice cracked. The first crack I'd ever heard. "I raised him, I fed him, I taught him to read. I sat up with him when he was sick. You were an incubator, a carrier, you signed him away. You don't get to come back now when it's convenient and pretend you're his mother." "I'm not pretending," I said. "I am his mother. I always was. You were his parent, there's a difference. And you know what the difference is? A parent protects. A mother, a real mother, doesn't have to be taught how to love. She just does. Even when she's not allowed to show it. Even when she's told she's not good enough. Even when she's erased from every photo, every story, every Christmas card, that love doesn't stop. It doesn't transfer. It doesn't become yours just because you have the legal paperwork." She stepped toward me, close enough that I could smell her perfume, the same one she'd worn at 19, expensive and sharp. "I will take you to court," she said, her voice low. "I will get a restraining order. I will make sure you never see him again. I have resources, I have experience. I will destroy you, Maya. I have before, I will again." I looked at her, my sister, who had once been the sun I orbited, who had taught me that love was something you earned by being perfect, who had taken my child and my family and my sense of self and called it protection, and I felt something I didn't expect. Not anger, not fear. Pity. "Claire," I said, "you're divorced, you're in debt. Your son is 15 years old and he's choosing to take a bus 4 hours to sit on a porch with a woman he barely knows because she tells him the truth. You can take me to court. You can spend money you don't have on lawyers who will tell you what you already know, that at 15, a judge will ask Ethan what he wants, and he will say he wants to know me. You can fight this. You will lose. Not because I'm better than you. Not because I'm smarter. Because you built your whole life on controlling the story, and stories have a way of getting away from you. Especially when the person you're trying to erase is still here, still breathing, still loving the child you thought you could make forget me." She stared at me. The green eyes, my mother's eyes, blinked once, twice. Then she turned and walked back to her car, and she didn't look back. Just like she hadn't looked back when she took my son from the hospital. Just like she hadn't looked back when she closed the door on me 15 years ago. I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. I felt like a person who had finally stopped running from a fight she should have had 2 decades ago. She did take me to court. Not a restraining order, she knew that wouldn't work. Not with a teenager who was choosing contact. She filed for something called parental alienation, claiming I was manipulating Ethan against her, that I was undermining the parent-child relationship, that I was a danger to his emotional well-being. I got a lawyer. A good one, recommended by a colleague, paid for with savings I'd accumulated over years of teaching in a town with a low cost of living. I was terrified. I had never been in a courtroom except for the adoption hearing where I'd signed my son away. And that memory, the fluorescent lights, the notary's disinterest, Claire's hand on my shoulder, made me physically ill every time I thought about it. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday in March. Ethan was supposed to be there, to testify, to tell the judge what he wanted. Claire's lawyer, a sharp woman in a gray suit who looked at me like I was a bug she was preparing to squash, argued that Ethan was too young to know what was best for him, that my sudden reappearance was predatory, that I had a history of instability evidenced by my estrangement from my family of origin. My lawyer, a kind man named David, which was ironic in a way that didn't make me laugh, objected. He presented the documents: the original birth certificate, the adoption papers, the cease and desist letter, the return cards, the messages between Ethan and me. He argued that I had never sought contact until Ethan found me, that I had been respectful of Claire's role as Ethan's primary parent for 15 years, that my only crime was answering when my son asked me to exist. The judge, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain around her neck, listened without expression. When both lawyers finished, she looked at Claire, then at me, then at the empty chair where Ethan was supposed to be. "Where is the minor?" she asked. Claire's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, Mrs. Harrington felt that the stress of testifying would be detrimental to Ethan's emotional well-being. He is not present." The judge removed her glasses. "Mrs. Harrington is not the one who decides whether the minor testifies in my courtroom. I asked where he is." The door at the back of the courtroom opened. Ethan walked in, wearing the same hoodie he'd worn the first time I met him, carrying a backpack that still looked too heavy. He looked at Claire, a look I couldn't read, something between sadness and resignation, and then he looked at me and he nodded, small and certain. "I apologize for being late, Your Honor," he said. His voice cracked slightly on honor, but he kept going. "I had to take the bus. My mom, Mrs. Harrington, took my car keys this morning. She didn't want me to come." The judge's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes shifted. "Approach the bench, young man," he did. He stood between the two lawyers' tables, between Claire and me, and he spoke without notes, without preparation, in the halting, honest way of a 15-year-old who hasn't yet learned to perform sincerity. "Your Honor," he said, "I know I'm supposed to say that I want to live with my mom. Claire, the one who raised me, and I do love her. She taught me a lot. She worked hard, she tried. But she also lied to me, my whole life, about where I came from, about who my birth mother was, about why I didn't have aunts or uncles or cousins. She told me Maya was dead, then sick, then dangerous. And when I found out the truth, when I found her letters in the attic, letters she never gave me, I realized that the person who raised me was also the person who made sure I never knew I had another mother who loved me." He paused, swallowing. "I'm not saying Claire is a bad person. I'm not saying she didn't love me, but I'm saying that Maya, my birth mom, she's the only person who never lied to me about who she was. She didn't seek me out. She didn't try to take me from Claire. She just answered when I asked. And she told me the truth, even when it was hard, even when it made her look bad, even when it meant admitting that she gave me up because she was scared and young and didn't know how to fight." He looked at Claire then, and his voice softened. "Mom, Claire, I know you think you're protecting me, but I'm 15. I'm not a baby. And what I need protection from isn't Maya. It's from never being allowed to know the whole story, from being told who I am by someone who needs me to be a certain way to make their story work." He turned back to the judge. "I want to live with Maya. Not because I hate Claire, because I want to know who I am. And I think the only way to do that is to know the person I came from. The person who never stopped wanting to know me back." The courtroom was silent. I was crying, silently, the tears running down my face and into the collar of the blouse I'd bought specifically for this hearing, the only nice blouse I owned. Claire was not crying. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded on the table, her green eyes fixed on some point in the middle distance where I imagined she was already rewriting this story into something she could control. The judge put her glasses back on. "I'm going to take a 15-minute recess," she said. "When I return, I will issue my ruling." She left. Ethan walked over to me, hesitant, unsure of the protocol for this moment. I stood up, my legs were shaking, and I hugged him. He was taller than me. He smelled like the bus, like teenage boy, like the future I had stopped allowing myself to imagine. "Thank you," I whispered into his shoulder. "Thank you," he said back, "for not giving up, even when I didn't know you were trying." The judge's ruling was not dramatic. She did not denounce Claire. She did not declare me the superior mother. She simply noted that Ethan was 15, that his preference was clear and well-reasoned, that there was no evidence of abuse or neglect on my part, and that the court's role is not to determine which parent is better, but to facilitate the minor's well-being. In this case, the minor has expressed a clear desire to reside with his biological mother, and the court sees no compelling reason to override that preference. She added, looking at Claire, "Mrs. Harrington, I would encourage you to seek family counseling. Not because you are unfit, but because this young man will benefit from maintaining a relationship with both women, and the court expects you to facilitate that rather than obstruct it." Claire nodded, once, stiffly. She did not look at me. She did not look at Ethan. She gathered her papers and walked out of the courtroom with the same straight spine she'd had at 19, at 24, at 40, the spine of a person who had never learned that bending was not the same as breaking. Ethan moved in with me that weekend. Not permanently, he still had school, friends, a life in the city that I couldn't replicate in my small town. But he spent weekends with me. Holidays. Summers. He met Hemingway, who tolerated him with the same indifference he showed everyone. He sat on my creaky porch and did homework while I graded papers. He asked about my mother, his grandmother, who had died 2 years prior without either of us knowing the other was grieving. He asked about my father, who had called me once after the hearing, awkward and brief, to say he was glad things worked out, which was the closest he would ever come to an apology. He asked about Claire sometimes, not often. He was angry at her, I think, in the diffuse, complicated way that teenagers are angry at parents who have failed them without meaning to. I told him what I could, that she had loved him in her way, that her cruelty to me was not necessarily cruelty to him, that people are rarely all good or all bad. I told him these things because they were true, and because I didn't want him to grow up thinking that love was something that had to be perfect to be real. But I also told him the truth about what she had done to me. Not as revenge. As history. As the context he needed to understand why I had been absent, why I had been silent, why I had waited 15 years to hold him again. I told him because stories matter. Because the version of history you believe determines the future you can imagine. Because I had spent too long letting Claire write my story, and I was done being a footnote in my own life. Claire and I do not speak. She sends Ethan birthday cards, always late, always with a check he never cashes, and he texts her occasionally, polite and distant, the way you interact with a relative you don't quite know how to feel about. I don't know if she has found another husband, another life, another child to fill the space he left. I don't check her social media anymore. The wound has closed enough that I no longer need to pick at it. I am not happy exactly. Happiness is too simple a word for what I feel. I am present. I am here in my cottage, with my two-foot cat and my creaky porch, and my students who will never know that their history teacher once gave away the most important thing in her life because she was too young to know she was allowed to fight for it. Ethan is 17 now. He has a girlfriend named Sarah who is too smart for him, which I tell him regularly. He is applying to colleges, including the state school where I transferred, which makes me laugh and cry in equal measure. He calls me Mom, which sounded strange at first, foreign and too sweet, and now sounds like the only word that was ever supposed to follow my name. He is not the child I imagined during those 4 to 7 minutes in the hospital. He is not the baby I knitted blankets for, the toddler I sent stuffed rabbits to, the boy I dreamed about during 15 years of silence. He is a person, complicated, imperfect, still figuring out who he is and who he wants to be. He is not mine in the way Claire wanted him to be hers. He is not a possession, a trophy, a story she can control. He is my son, and I am his mother. And the space between those two facts is where we are building something new. Something that doesn't require perfection. Something that doesn't erase the years we lost, but doesn't let them define the years we have left. I think about Claire sometimes. I think about what she wanted, control, perfection, a life that looked right from the outside, and I think about what it cost her. Not just me, not just Ethan, herself. She spent so long curating the story that she forgot to live inside it. She collected people like evidence, like exhibits in a case she was always arguing, and she never learned that the jury she was trying to convince was never going to give her the verdict she wanted. I don't hate her. That took longer than I expected, longer than the court case, longer than Ethan's first year with me, longer than the first time he called me Mom without hesitation. But I got there. Not because I'm particularly virtuous, but because hate takes energy I no longer have to spend. She is my sister. She is the reason I lost 15 years with my child. She is also a person who is aging, who is alone, who built a life on control and watched it crumble when the one thing she couldn't control was time. I don't forgive her either. Forgiveness is not something you perform to make yourself noble. It's something that happens, or doesn't, when the wound has healed enough that the scar no longer hurts. My scar still hurts sometimes. When Ethan asks about his baby photos and I have to say I wasn't there. When I see mothers with toddlers in the grocery store and I feel a phantom ache for a child who is now taller than me. When I think about what I could have been, what we could have been if I had been braver at 19, if I had known that best is just a word people use to get you to stop fighting. But I am here now. I am present. I am not a ghost in my own life anymore. My name is Maya. I'm 34 years old. I teach history to teenagers who think the past doesn't matter, and I try to show them that the past is the only thing that explains why we are who we are. I have a son who found me when I had stopped looking for him. I have a porch that creaks when it rains. I have a cat who is objectively too fat. I have a life that is small and imperfect and entirely my own. And I have learned, finally, that the only way to erase someone's legacy is not to replace it. It's to outlive it. To keep being here, keep being visible, keep being the person they tried to make you believe you weren't. Claire wanted me to disappear. She wanted my love for my son to become a footnote in her story. She failed. Not because I defeated her, because I endured, because I stayed. Because I am still here, still breathing, still loving, still telling the truth about who I am and where I came from. If you've ever had someone try to write you out of your own story, this one's for you. If you've ever believed that love means surrendering, that family means obeying, that being sweet and nice and good means letting other people decide what you're allowed to want, I hope my story helps you understand that the only person who gets to decide your story is you. The past is not a prison, it's a foundation. And what you build on it, that's up to you. I'm Maya. I'm 34. And I'll see you in the next story.